Hello, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Best-in-Class Companies Are Outsourcing Recruiting? How about you? My name is David Goodstein, and I'm a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It's our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with Accolo. I'll be working in the background to help answer any general or technical questions that you may have. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly tell you about the questions box you can use throughout today's session. We encourage you at any time during the presentation to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click the submit button. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will be receiving a follow-up email in approximately 1 day, which will include a link with today's recorded webinar and presentation slides. The webinar recording and presentation slides will also be available at outsourcing.com. I'd like to now quickly go over the speakers of today's webinar. We have Larry Heckathorn from the Human Capital Group, Rike of Accolo, and Mark Baudler from Panduit. I'd like to send it over to them to say a few words about themselves to get it started. So Larry.
Well, hi and welcome everyone. This is Larry Heckathorn. My background is I spent a number of years at Accolo where in HR where I headed up a number of the HR programs worldwide. From there I was a partner with Arthur Anderson in their human capital practice, and more recently in 2004 I founded the Human Capital Group, and the Human Capital Group is an organization that we focus on assisting clients in making their informed business decisions when they're considering outsourcing HR and payroll functions.
Okay, great. And Ray Rike?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. So I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Accolo. But probably more importantly, I was a frustrated hiring executive, having spent 10 years at GE running the Americas for one of the divisions, and then had the chance to start doing startups in Silicon Valley, starting with Netscape. And after hiring thousands of people, I just knew there had to be a better way, which is why I joined Accolo, and we'll be happy to talk about how we take the concepts of big data and cloud computing and applying it to the outsourcing of the recruitment function. And Mark?
Good morning, everyone. Mark Baudler from Panduit. I'm a senior manager here in the HR department at Panduit. We are a technology solutions company, global private-owned company based just outside of Chicago, Illinois. And my role in the HR department is focused around the services we provide our internal customers, as well as process improvement. And that's pretty much how I came across Accolo a while back, and you'll get to hear my story in a few minutes.
Great. Thanks, Mark. I'd like to now say a few words about the Outsourcing Institute for those who aren't familiar with us. The Outsourcing Institute is a professional association dedicated to providing independent best practices, tools, roadshow events, and networking opportunities for all forms of outsourcing. Located at outsourcing.com, we have 70,000 members globally. OI specializes in providing low-cost and no-cost alternatives for outsourcing buyers in need of RFP tools, vendor selection assistance, training, as well as general support and coaching. For those of you who are in this market, we offer an array of very targeted sponsorship and promotional opportunities. Our sister company, CMS, provides recruiting services for those seeking to hire outsourced professionals experienced at buying, selling, managing, or consulting in this arena. Our contact information is at the bottom of the screen for those who have any questions. I'd like to now quickly go over a few events the Outsourcing Institute has coming up. We have our Sales Readiness 2013, Finish 2013 Strong. This will be held on September 24th in London, England. We also have our BPO Innovations Conference in New York City on November 13th. For more information, please visit us at outsourcing.com/events. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Ray Wright to begin this presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, David. So it's kind of setting the agenda for the next 45 to 50 minutes for everyone. So number one, we're going to talk about the industry shift and what's really driving this trend to seeing more and more companies taking advantage of the outsourcing for recruiting. What are some of the tactical indicators that if your company is experiencing might be a good sign that recruitment process outsourcing may be an alternative for you? Doesn't mean it will be, but they're good indicators. Talk a little bit about some of the more strategic initiatives that are having companies think and consider, does outsourcing recruiting make sense for us? And what we think is probably the most important part of today's webinar is actually to allow you to hear a real customer example of the strategic and tactical indicators that drove them to evaluating outsourcing the recruitment function and some of the early successes they have seen with this decision. Then Larry will talk a lot more from what they've seen over the years of what are the best practices when you start considering outsourcing, from evaluating the potential alternative ways to outsource recruiting, what some of the key success metrics are, etc. And then we'll summarize today with a few tips and tricks of what best-in-class companies have found to help ensure the strategic success of their outsourcing decision, and a little bit about some of the key criteria that you can use to measure the success of an RPO program. So with that, let me shift a little bit to what a lot of people initially think is, well, outsourcing recruiting, right? That seems like a strategic function, especially since talent is the key to our organization. Or I'm a very small company. I'm not sure that outsourcing really makes sense to us. So we found one of the preeminent research organizations in the U.S. marketplace is staffing.org, and they conducted an annual survey of over 1,000 different companies. And what they found is most organizations today are using some level of outsourcing in their recruitment function. Even for companies under 100 employees, it might be that they're outsourcing the contingent labor portion of their recruiting. We found some larger organizations look at either by business unit or by geography or even functional group, that don't really have the core competency or expertise to recruit IT professionals, for example. So they're outsourcing a part of all the recruiting, but not all of it. But what's really interesting is for larger companies, almost 80% of them are using some level of recruitment process outsourcing. And even for the smallest companies in the U.S., which, by the way, drive about 45 million hires a year out of the total 50 million we make in the United States, are using some level of outsourcing. To get a little bit more granularity and perspective on who's taking advantage of recruitment process outsourcing, we think looking at it on an industry basis is also very enlightening. And I'm not going to bore you to death with reading each one of these, but needless to say, some of those organizations that are hiring the most difficult to fill positions, a lot of engineering positions, a lot of highly skilled labor, are actually taking more advantage of RPOs than even the less complex jobs, the high turnover jobs, such as in the retailing and hospitality industry. But it's really not something that you would be left alone. There's going to be a lot of resources and people who have experience outsourcing all or part of the recruiting that you can learn from. Now, talking a little bit about what are some tactical indicators that maybe I should consider outsourcing all or a portion of my recruiting. And this was based upon a survey that we did to about 2,000 hiring manager respondents last year. And what it really talks about is, are hiring managers today in corporate America satisfied with the recruit to hire process? And what was very enlightening to us is for small companies, only about 8% of their hiring managers, people who actually have to go out, identify, engage, assess, and hire new employees, are satisfied with their recruitment process today. And even the largest organizations, 10,000 employees or more, only about 12% of the hiring managers would rank their satisfaction as high to very high in the large corporate space. Now that in and of itself can be a startling fact, but what we found even more, and quite frankly we'll use the word alarming, was the disconnect between HR professionals' perspective on how easy it was to recruit in their organization versus hiring managers. And once again, starting with this smallest customers, those under 250 employees, almost 43% of hiring managers found the recruit to hire process to be extremely difficult, and they were very dissatisfied. But what's interesting is when you ask the HR for those same companies, what do you think the level of dissatisfaction with the recruit to hire process is? Only 12%. So it's almost a 3x difference between the hiring manager's perspective and the HR perspective on how effective, efficient, and satisfied are you with recruiting. And what's very interesting is you get into larger companies, the disconnect can be even more. In fact, in the largest companies, when you go out and talk to the HR people, and these are the people who run talent acquisition functions, only about 4% think that their recruit to hire process is not satisfying their core constituents, the hiring managers. but almost 30% of hiring managers are extremely dissatisfied with the efficiency, effectiveness, and outcome of the recruiting process today. So we think this is a strong indicator that if you're not doing hiring manager satisfaction surveys within your organization today, but you're thinking, does outsourcing make sense to me or not? I would strongly recommend you conduct a hiring manager satisfaction survey. Now, another tactical indicator that outsourcing may be something you want to consider is your cost. And a lot of people view cost as the primary, and what you'll find out today is that best practice say that cost should be a consideration, but shouldn't be the primary reason you consider outsourcing. But when you do look at your cost per hire, most people use something like this. It's like, you know, my effective cost per hire is $5,800, or my cost per hire is $2,269. But what we found is based upon the blend of roles that you're hiring for, entry-level customer service versus electrical engineers or quality engineers or product management people, a better approach to determining if cost is out of range of industry benchmarks is to use something called the recruiting cost ratio. And what recruiting cost ratio really does for you is it takes all the costs associated with hiring people, applicant tracking systems, job boards, sourcing, internal staff, etc., and most importantly sometimes leakage to contingency agencies, and it divides that by the total combined first-year salary of the roles that you're hiring for. And what's really interesting with this model, if you look at Recruiter D, and you can think about this as Company D, the organization or recruiter that looks like they have the lowest cost per hire, in fact, has the highest recruiting cost ratio. And why is that? It's because they were actually hiring much lower income and easier to fill positions. So even though their cost per hire looked better, their actual efficiency was not nearly as good as the other organizations. So something that you should look at is not only what your cost per hire is, but what really is my recruiting cost ratio by role. And this is some additional industry benchmark data from staffing.org that shows you the average RCR across the United States, quite frankly, by all the way back to 2000. And it shows you the latest year that the data is available, it was about 10.9%. So if you look at all the combined salaries of all the people you hired in the last 12 months, this would say that you spent 10.9% of that just to recruit those individuals. Once again, just so you know, I always live by the law. There's lies, damn lies, and then there's data. So we wanted to provide you more granularity into each industry has very different RCRs, and quite frankly, by geography and even by size of company, your RCR will differ. But typically the range is going to be anywhere from the low end of about 7 to 8% up to about 15%. So another tactical indicator is, what are the external conditions that's impacting your industry or your geographic role or the functional roles that you're hiring for? And what this survey shows is that in certain industries and certain functional roles, the war for talent is having the largest impact on my staffing organization. What type of recruiters I need to have, how much money I spend on passive candidate identification, i.e. sourcing. So one of the things we'd also encourage you to look at is, what are the external factors on my recruiting and hiring that I think is really impacting my ability to attract and hire the highest caliber people. So another indicator is how aggressively you are taking advantage of social media. Now what's really interesting, and unfortunately a lot of us are not early adopters, we're early majority or late adopters of new technology. In the last 12 months since LinkedIn went public, we're hearing a lot of people saying, oh, all I need to do is become better at social and recruiting will get more efficient. And even though all these numbers talk about the trends towards using social media as an element of your recruiting strategy, the tactical indicator we want you to be aware of everyone's saying, boy, if we just made better use of LinkedIn, we would be able to solve our needs. It's the same way 10 years ago, if you said, I just need to make better use of Monster Career Builder, but recruiting is going to be easy. We know that that's not exactly accurate. And in fact, if you look at how jobs are being marketed today, if you thought LinkedIn or social media was the best choice, this data might really surprise you. I mean, LinkedIn is still one of the smallest places that candidates will go to look for jobs. Whether that's a pseudo-active candidate, someone who just didn't get that promotion that he or she thought was they deserved. If it is a more active candidate, someone who's actually between jobs or looking to make a career change, right? Those people aren't primarily using LinkedIn as a mechanism. So what this says is if you're looking at social as the savior to your candidate and pipelining challenges, that might be a little bit too narrow of a view. And then we think one of the other strong indicators that recruitment process outsourcing might be of interest to you is if workforce planning is very dynamic in your organization. What we have found since the macroeconomic recession of 2008 through, and some people would say it's still happening, is that most organizations reduced the amount of internal resources they were allocating to talent acquisition, to recruiting. But when they reduced that internal staff and the budget allocated, they had more difficulty in dealing with those spikes in hiring, whether those are seasonal spikes, a new product initiative, if you're more of a services company and you got some major new clients. So when you think about outsourcing, don't think about it as I'm just outsourcing all of recruiting. You can also think about it as having on-demand recruitment capacity at your fingertips, but doing that with a lower cost and more predictable and scalable model than contract recruiters or contingency firms. So about 50% of organizations who consider outsourcing recruitment today aren't outsourcing the entire function, they're outsourcing those spikes in their hiring demand. And about another 50% of companies who outsource the recruitment function today are truly outsourcing the entire department, the people, the product, and the process. So going back to the tactical indicator, if you believe that some of your functional departments don't have great visibility into the recruiting demands more than 3 months out, or you have external variables that impact your hiring trends, you might consider a recruitment process outsourcing partner either on an on-demand or on a turnkey basis. So those are some of the tactical indicators. Now, what I'd like to do before we turn this over to Mark at Panduit to have him give you some specific details on what their challenges were and what their best practices were to successfully implement an RPO. We also wanted to talk about the strategic shift that's happening in the marketplace today, from the old staffing model for those of us who have been in it for a long time to the more strategic approach today. I'm not going to read all these, but I'm going to highlight 2 or 3 key ones. One is, traditionally, the focus was, how do I get enough great candidates into the top of the funnel? And what we're finding right now is that generating candidates to the top of the funnel has become a little bit easier with online job marketing, with all the social media, with sophisticated Boolean logic search elements. We'll fill in the top of the funnel okay for a lot of roles. But the recruiting organization wants to shift their time away from the tactical, let's post jobs, let's go ahead and filter some resumes and do some phone screens, to more the bottom of the funnel. How are we really collaborating with hiring managers to ensure we're getting the right people into those interviews, that we're actually increasing the performance of our workforce by looking at those gaps in our current employee base that we need to fill? Second thing that we're seeing is people are looking at metrics differently. Instead of just measuring cost and time, they're really looking at things like, what's the effectiveness of our recruitment function? For the people that we bring in, how do they perform? Are they high potential people, or are they B and C players? What's the retention rate of those people that we're recruiting externally versus referrals? And then sometimes, almost more importantly, people are looking at, what was the business impact of a job remaining open, but also what was the business impact of the people that we brought in by source? So really looking at metrics on a more strategic versus tactical basis. And then the third thing that we'll highlight here is recruiting is not about posting and praying and just trying to bring resumes in. Part of recruiting strategic charter today is how am I helping build the brand of my company? The same way that your marketing organization is always trying to build brand awareness and building the brand's reputation in your local communities, recruiting needs to do the same thing. In fact, the recruitment department sometimes will be touching more potential brand advocates in your community than even your marketing organization is. In fact, we have one retail customer, as we were talking to the chief financial officer, we were asking a little bit about how many candidates they touched every year. And they said, oh, well, we fill about 3,000 to 4,000 jobs, so we're probably touching 3 million, maybe even 3.5 million candidates per year. And the question we asked was, do you get back to every one of those candidates if they're not going to be hired? And the answer was no way we could do that. That would take way too much of our recruiter's time. And the next question we asked was, well, aren't those candidates also potential customers? So view that customer or that candidate not just as a potential employee, view that candidate as a potential customer, a potential brand advocate, and a potential referral source. So really kind of shifting from the tactical, let's just get great candidates into the interview process, to let's help promote and build our brand in the marketplace. So with that, I'm going to move away a little bit from the tactical and strategic indicators that outsourcing might be of interest to you, and now have Mark Baudler talk a little bit about the specific Panduit experience. And what we'd really like to encourage is any questions that you have during this session, please do ask those in the question box, and we will have Mark address those in real time. Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be here today. As Ray said, my name is Mark Baudler. I am with Panduit. We are a technology solutions company out of Tinley Park, Illinois. One of my favorite companies I've worked at in my career. I've been here about 2 years so far. When I started here in my career, I actually started over in the manufacturing side of the house. And this position opened up in HR, which I think I was a good fit for because I have that analytical outside-in view of the business. A lot of lean principles that we use in manufacturing that are very applicable in HR. So when I took this role in HR, one of the first things I did was I said, I need to get data. I need to talk to our HR customers and find out what they think of HR and what they think of our business. And that led me to initially look at talent acquisition and a lot of the challenges that we're having with talent acquisition. So one of the big ones, the one everyone always looks at is the cost of recruitment. And ours was very high. We knew it was high, but we didn't know how high. So we worked very closely with our finance business partner, and we turned over every rock and found every penny that we think we could find that had to do with our recruitment costs. So everything from obviously the salaries and benefits is the upfront one, search firms, our LinkedIn subscriptions, job board postings. We even started to be strategic and look at things such as relocation expenses. We noticed that we had kind of a high number of candidates relocating, and sometimes we might offer a relocation package or a sign-on bonus, that sort of a thing. And those costs really add up by not being able to find local talent. So that was a huge find looking at all those costs. The staffing levels were something we definitely looked at, and how we managed our business. And depending on what we had going on and how many positions, we could have up to 6 full-time employees or contractors, as little as 3. We knew that during slow times, we would let some of the contractors go, and these are people we just got up to speed on our processes and everything. So that's sort of a soft cost, that lost cost and knowledge walking out the door. So that was a big indicator for us. Hiring manager satisfaction was huge, so we did a survey, and we found out what is the hiring manager satisfaction. It sort of validates exactly what Ray showed a few slides ago. Hiring managers were not very satisfied with what we were providing them from HR. And so one of the questions that I challenge everyone in HR to ask is, would HR customers pay for this service if necessary? So we're not a profit center, but that's a question we should be asking ourselves. How do we know if we're providing good services? And this number told us out of 10, we obviously, a lot of people probably wouldn't want to pay for the service that we were providing for them. We got a lot of feedback, such as talent acquisition in HR is sort of a black hole. I open a vacancy, I don't know where it goes. It takes forever. People don't get back to me. I actually have a real-life example of someone in HR who had a vacancy, and they were one of the hiring managers that filled out the survey, and they even said it was a couple weeks before someone got back to me, and they actually sat just 50 feet away from each other. So if we provide that service to HR, the business must be getting similar, if not worse service. Time to fill, something we looked very closely at. So our technical time to fill is one of our most important metrics. We're a technology company. We have brilliant engineers and research people on staff. And when those positions open up, getting those filled quickly with good quality talent is one of the most important things for us. To not have someone in that position, there could be a product that they didn't come up with and get to market in time, and one of our competitors did. In talking to some of the people in R&D and asking them, what really is the cost to you from not having someone in a job for an extra 90 days or 100 days? And the answer was it could be millions. We could miss out on a product, and it could cost us millions by not having that time to fill lowered. The sales and marketing is also very important to us, so we do put some amazing products and solutions out in the marketplace, and it's hard to get them to our customers without good, talented sales and marketing folks in the right jobs at the right time. So our time to fill there is extremely critical. If we have a salesperson leave a certain region and there's no one in that region, making sales there is going to be pretty challenging. So that was one of our indicators that we wanted to look at going forward through this. And so now some of our staffing needs. So I really love this slide because this really helped us sell it to the executives here. It really shows, and it's very similar to one of the slides Ray had. As things happen throughout the year, we need to pull in more consultants, more search firms, which it comes with a huge expense. And then there's times where we don't really have enough work for our current staff, which can start to create some poor habits that we found. So this slide really visually showed, wow, the whole talent acquisition area, it's so dynamic. We need to be dynamic in our strategy, not just have a group of full-time people trying to do what an RPO could do. So some of our key success criteria when we entered into looking at this change and this investment, hard cost savings, it's not the most important thing, but it's definitely there. So we estimated that there could be about a 30% hard cost savings, and that includes everything from salary and benefits. Like I mentioned before, the relocation, we actually factored in that we think we could get at least a 20% reduction in relocation if we had better sourcing tools that could find local talent. We reduced our job board fees, LinkedIn subscriptions, and this was a lot of that turning over every rock, really looking at every group that had to put a special posting on a special job board and it got charged their cost center. We worked really hard to find all those costs. So from a soft cost saving, something some people might overlook, and moving to an RPO definitely is not only a cost, a hard dollar decision. The soft costs are actually quite a bit bigger. So if you think about the productivity of your HR staff, if the vacancy takes an extra 30 days, that's a lot of their time that they're spending on it. Involving legal procurement when we deal with the search firms. A huge one that we actually put in our business case had to do with the amount of work that still needs to be done when there's a vacancy. So somebody leaves your team, they left and they were doing work. Someone still has to do that work. So we used about 20 hours per week per vacancy of work still needs to be done and is actually spread out to other people on the team. So if we have 100 vacancies a year and let's say we know our time to fill is 28 days too long. If we take those 100 vacancies and we can get that down 28 days, that's about $500,000 a year in productivity right there off the bat. So it is a soft cost, but it's a very real cost that you shouldn't lose sight of. Our systems as well, we knew there was a lot of soft costs there with our outdated applicant tracking system that was really hurting us. And again, the lost costs with R&D and engineering, I mean, that's just so huge to us to have the right people in the right place at the right time and make sure we're putting those products out to market. We knew that in order for us to get to where an RPO is, the cost of that would just be immense and maybe not even possible. So there's things that the RPO was able to offer us that we couldn't really even put a cost on, such as the database that they have of applicants, the e-marketing campaigns that they can launch, the analytics that they have, the passive candidate sourcing, the pipeline building that they can do for us. All of those types of things. It was how could we get there internally if we wanted to, and we really couldn't put a dollar on that. And then creativity, how do you put a dollar amount on that as well? So for example, the Craigslist number that Ray mentioned earlier, we were a little shocked at first. We're like, you're going to put our jobs on Craigslist? We never thought of that. And to date, some of our hardest to fill jobs have come from people that have applied over Craigslist, especially in the IT engineering world. So that was something we never would have thought of before, but it's filled some of our huge jobs. So that's a soft cost not to lose sight of. From an organizational readiness standpoint, our executive sponsorship really was key. Outsourcing is not always a popular subject at companies, especially a small privately owned company like ours. So we knew our business case was going to be critical. It wasn't just about finding some hard dollars, it was about finding significant hard dollars to justify it, as well as the strategic advantages we could get. Luckily, by doing some of those surveys and the face-to-face interviews that we did, we had a lot of really good, hard evidence of high-level people in the company saying, this is a major gap and I need this addressed. So we were able to take that feedback as well as our data and get buy-in from the company. Something I think important to note is that this was a proactive process improvement venture. So this was HR doing some research saying, here's where we can improve, and we brought that to the business leaders and said, hey, we can do this and we can improve. I think that helped us as opposed to the business leaders saying, hey, HR, you're kind of failing here, fix this. It's always better to be proactive on your problems than reactive. The cultural alignment we knew was going to be really important, so we are a small privately owned company. There's that cliche family that you hear in companies sometimes. It's not cliche here. People hang out at work, they hang out on weekends, they see each other at Home Depot. That family atmosphere really exists here. And we knew that if we were going to outsource and bring an RPO in, that cultural fit was going to be very important, that we needed to find a long-term relationship RPO partner. Switching out every year was not something that would work with our culture. As far as change management, this was probably the easiest change management initiative of my career, hands down. The business had a major pain, 5.2 hiring manager satisfaction score. They had a pain, they wanted it fixed, and we said, hey, we can fix that. So we had the buy-in, we just had to prove it, but we had the buy-in from the hiring managers. So rolling out this, the RPO was key in it. They came in, they helped us with communications, they helped us with the campaign, the right way to roll it out. They were there to do hiring manager sessions to make the transition and introduce them to the new process and the new system. Luckily, both are extremely simple and easy, so the change from a hiring manager standpoint was sort of a blessing in disguise. So we fixed the problem, we gave a better solution with higher quality. So some of our key success criteria.
Hey Mark?
Yes, Ray?
We have a question here somebody put in.
Sure.
And the question is, the daily interactions with my hiring managers is a critical, component for us. Don't I lose that with the RPO?
So we didn't. That was actually an improvement for us. The way that the RPO hiring consultants interact daily with the hiring managers is far superior than anything we were providing in the past. So not only do we have hiring consultants that we don't call them recruiters, we call them hiring consultants because they actually consult and do more than we used to do. But we also have a person on site from the RPO that manages the relationship. So between all of them, they are 1,000% more engaged with the hiring managers today than when we had our in-house model, for sure. And the hiring managers are very appreciative of it. They're getting consulting, so we're not just opening recs and trying to fill them anymore. We have these hiring consultants saying, are you sure that's what you need? What about this? Could we change the job up like that? Are you sure you're looking for this? What's more important? Really helping us be strategic about our vacancies instead of just trying to fill, hey, somebody left, let's fill it. We now have that strategic side, and the hiring managers are very happy so far about it. So hopefully that answered your question. So some lessons learned that we have. Finding every penny was huge. Again, they can be hiding, so you got to look at every cost center. You got to have a really good financial business partner to help you with this. You need to have that hard ROI, or at least a break even, to justify this. Again, the soft costs are probably way more than the hard costs, but it always helps with the initial shock of you want to do what? You want to outsource? If you can show the value, it's going to help you. The metrics, coming from manufacturing, I'm definitely a data geek, so this was something I really paid a lot of attention to. We had our cost per hire. We didn't have the ratio like Ray mentioned yet, but the cost per hire was high enough that it made an impact. We had our time to fill broken out based on a region and business group. Even there's other metrics that help to look at, such as days to present. So that's how quickly you put the candidate you ultimately hired in front of the hiring manager. Days to accept. Looking at those can really help you pinpoint gaps in the process and can help you measure the success of any changes that you do make. We did a pilot, which was definitely something I'm glad that we did. We did a 12-job pilot with the RPO, and we definitely did not give them easy jobs in the pilot. We tried to give them a mix of easy, hard, and medium, but a lot of our openings at the time tended to be more of the hard ones. So we did do the pilot. It really helped us show that the culture of the RPO was going to fit. The way that they came in, engaged with the hiring managers, formed that relationship, and really executed was huge. If we'd not done a pilot with this RPO, luckily it would have worked out well. But if you're thinking about doing this, I highly recommend doing a pilot. Having the dedicated liaison in HR between the RPO and HR is pretty critical. So we've got about one FTE, which is pretty much half me, half my boss, a couple other people. So we don't have that dedicated person, which I really wish that we did. So I tend to get in the weeds in recruiting more than I would like to. But it really helps to have that person in between the RPO and HR, because even when you outsource, we did a full outsource model. Even when you outsource, there's still internal vacancies that need to be filled. There's still questions coming in. There's that transition period when you go from internal to external, and you really do need someone overseeing that. In the future, maybe that's something we could outsource as well, but for our initial dive into outsourcing, that role is critical for us. And another lesson learned, something that we did, is we were pretty honest with our current recruiting staff. We said, hey, we're doing a pilot with an RPO. We didn't try to hide it or keep it secret, which I could see that you wanted to do that just because people can maybe see the writing on the wall, like, oh my gosh, am I going to lose my job? Being that we are that private family-owned company, we're honest with our people, and we were honest with the recruiters and said, hey, we are bringing our RPO in. Here's what's going on. You know, they were a part of it from the beginning, and I think that did work out well in the end. Some key critical success factors. So having the RPO relationship manager on site has probably been the #1 success factor for us. So we have a lady that's here 3 days a week, and she has completely transformed our processes, our hiring managers, the people in HR. Without that role, I don't know if we would have gotten the successes we've gotten so far. So that at first it's like, oh, here's an added expense, you know, to have this person on site, but it has been worth its weight so much just to have somebody be able to take the metrics, explain them to the business, really integrate the teams together. It's been very, very huge for us to have that person on site. The hiring consultants, we've really tried to include them into our company culture. So we got them regular employee badges so they don't look like They're not employees. We have a different color badge for visitors and stuff. So they have normal badges. They have Panduit email addresses. We even have a couple cubicles. So if they're in town or if they're local, they're welcome to come here, sit on site. They come down and eat lunch with us. They're invited to events. We have a family days thing coming up for our company. They're welcome to come to that. So we've really included them into our culture. And that's been huge. The hiring managers really can't tell that they're dealing with an Accolo hiring consultant, not a full-time Panduit recruiter. Well, they can tell because they're getting a better quality of service, but from a cultural standpoint, you can't tell that you're working with a different company. And then the consumer-grade experience was sort of maybe a unexpected benefit that ended up being a success factor. So our current applicant tracking system is pretty outdated and old and not friendly for a hiring manager or a applicant. And it's 2013. People are used to Google and Amazon and that high consumer-grade experience. And by going with the RPO, the system that it came with actually gave us that. So we were able to do so much more with initial interview questions. Just the entire candidate experience from day one was improved so much. And then we also found that hiring managers are able to do a lot more of the work that they should be doing on their own because the system is so intuitive and easy to use, where in the past HR used to have to print out resumes and hand it to them and have face-to-face talks. The hiring managers are now able to go into the system and do everything they need to do and more to work their vacancies. That really has helped with our efficiency. And so lastly, I have some early results from our RPO relationship that I can share with everyone. So our the cost of recruitment, the relationship is only about 9 months old now with the pilot, so we don't have all of our first year numbers in, but we are on track to be at about a 30% reduction, if not more possibly. So the RPO has actually helped bring to light a lot of our processes, and we've made some pretty good changes. Staffing levels, we have one full-time person, which 2 people half-time, but one full-time person in terms of cost compared to that 3 to 6 we had in the past. So huge initial ROI there when it comes to salary and benefits. Very exciting one is our hiring manager satisfaction. So as of Q2, we were at 8.2. So in less than a year to have that huge of a jump in terms of hiring manager satisfaction, that's almost an instant win for us right there. We have people, so the sales group, for example, just want the Accolo, and they still ask, hey, is Accolo going to work this job for us? Because that's what they want. That's what's worked well for them. So it's great to see that number up. Our technical time to fill, so this gets into our soft costs, has been huge. Some of the jobs that have been filled for us were just amazing. We had one of the jobs that we turned over was a software engineer position. We had it with a search firm. We were expecting to probably have to relocate somebody from maybe California or the East Coast, possibly even the cost of a visa, things like that. And what the RPO actually did for us is the candidate they found lived 10 blocks from the office. So they were able to get, and who has turned out to be a fantastic employee, 10 blocks from the office. So that eliminated the time to fill for us, the relocation costs. That was a huge win. And then the sales and marketing jobs, those are down a little bit. We haven't had as many of those, so that's probably why the number isn't down more than it is. We're starting to see an uptick in that. But those numbers are down and doing really well. And that's my story from Panduit. So any questions, feel free to throw them in the questions box.
Hey, Mark, we have one more question here, and that is, how critical was the RPO partner's industry experience in your evaluation criteria?
It was very, very critical. So the process we took in looking for an RPO, we actually used the Baker's Dozen list from HRO Magazine, and we talked to everyone on that list for mid-sized companies, because Panduit is a mid-sized company, and we interviewed them. Their success in the industry was important. They obviously, I mean, that's important, but also the cultural fit was pretty huge. We noticed that right away when interviewing the RPO. The honesty that came across in our initial discussions made us say, wow, the cultural fit is definitely here. So there were many factors that went into it, but culture and success in the industry were definitely the top two.
Great. Thank you, Mark, very much. And with that, we're going to transfer it over to Larry with the Human Capital Group and talking a little bit about, what are some of the steps for planning and evaluation that you should use. So, Larry?
Thanks, Ray. I appreciate it. As many of you may know, most organizations that we work with, they view the recruitment process as very strategic to the success of their organization. But as most of you also know, the processes in which you work within the recruitment area are quite complex. When you're considering outsourcing, I can tell you that the devil's in the details, and I think you've got a real taste of that with what Ray was talking about earlier and what Mark was just talking about through his experience. I can tell you that not paying attention to the details will often result in a broken process and dissatisfied customers. And as both Ray and Mark have pointed out, it's not just the hiring managers that are your customers, it's also the candidates. And what you have to keep in mind is this is the first experience a candidate has with your organization. So it's a very critical interaction that takes place for their first experience. I've listed here a sample of what a structured approach might look like. Just to highlight a few of the points, however, getting the stakeholders and the team involved at the beginning is absolutely crucial. And documenting and getting that team's input and buy-in to the approach is critical to the success of the project. The last thing you need is someone trying to unravel your process because they weren't involved or you didn't get their buy-in. One step that we see that a lot of organizations tend to overlook, and would hope you wouldn't overlook, is documenting your current state processes. This will help ensure that each process activity is accounted for in the new environment. It will also be your baseline for developing a statement of work, which will become a significant part of your contract with a provider should you decide to outsource. Now, whether you decide to evaluate one provider or use an RFP to evaluate multiple providers, by all means, document the evaluation process in advance of talking with the providers. That will help keep you focused and give you a more thorough evaluation. And as Mark just pointed out, by all means, develop a comprehensive change management plan. It will yield lots of benefits. Now let's talk a little bit about some best practices or pitfalls that you might experience, and can avoid if at all possible. As Ray mentioned earlier, don't let cost be your only objective. When cost is the only driver, it could result in implementing a flawed process. My experience working with companies is that when cost is their only or primary objective, they are 3 to 5 times more likely to repeat the provider search or try to bring the process back in-house within 3 years. You've gone through a lot of effort. Don't let that be your experience. And don't let all your hard work get challenged because you didn't involve the executives or hiring managers. As Mark pointed out, the executives were bought in right up front. They were looking for value. Cost is definitely important, but it's not the only driver. And the hiring managers were deeply involved in the process. A best practice, yet often overlooked step is take time to determine if you're going to question your providers, that is, take the time to determine the response to the questions that will meet your needs before you present them to the provider. This will help you identify any unnecessary or redundant questions. I'll have to tell you that my experience when organizations want to put together an RFP or talk to a provider, they come up with an array of questions, and oftentimes the questions are quite redundant or quite unnecessary, and they're not really certain of what the answer is they're looking for. If you establish what meets your needs in advance, it also creates the basis for a scoring tool for evaluating the provider or providers in an RFP. The best time to be objective in developing your proposal scoring approach is prior to talking to the providers or sending out the RFP. Your questions and how you plan to weight questions and categories for provider responses should tie back directly to your goals and objectives. And by all means, be open to creative ideas. Remember, this is the provider's core competency. Now, moving on and continuing some of the best practices and pitfalls is let the provider determine the best way for them to deliver the service. This will help you to take advantage of their economies of scale. You can certainly evaluate if you like how they deliver the service, and the how can be a differentiator between providers, but don't try to force them into a specific technology or process that's inefficient. Let them show you what they've learned and capture their economies of scale everywhere possible. It's also important to complete each of these negotiation steps in sequence. Don't discuss price until you are clear on the work that will be performed. You know, my experience is that following these steps in sequence will result, if you don't follow these steps in sequence, it will result in scope creep or frustration. You know, define your statement of work, and when that's done, define your price. When you're done with the price, then come up with your service level agreement or performance metrics, and let the terms and conditions come last. Typically, that's the legal department's role. Now, most people are reluctant to change. They're even more resistant if they don't understand the change. You know, in real estate, you've heard the term location, location, location. While in change management, it's communication, communication, communication. If you don't communicate and communicate frequently and often, then the people out there who are affected by the process will fill in the gaps of what they feel the communication would have been. And typically, it's not the correct format. And also then, moving on to developing a strategic relationship with your RPO provider. If the program is strategic to your organization's success, then the relationship needs to be strategic in nature. This is where both the organization and the provider see value in the processes and relationship. This is best achieved by having a comprehensive and inclusive governance arrangement where both sides can express ideas or concerns about process change and improvements. All outsourcing initiatives, I can tell you, have good and bad experiences throughout the process. But it's how the bumps in the road are resolved that will tell you and the provider the nature of your relationship. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ray.
Great. Thank you so much, Larry. And I know we have about 7 minutes left, so we're just going to kind of wrap up with a summary, and we're starting with some of the top tips and tricks that we heard today from Mark and from Larry. And one is, and this is the best practice whether you're going to consider outsourcing recruitment or not, is conduct the hiring manager satisfaction survey. If you remember back to the disconnect between HR's perspective on HM satisfaction with recruiting and the hiring managers, you go out once a year and find out how happy your hiring manager satisfaction is. It might even help you refine your internal process. You know, go ahead and make sure you're capturing, measuring, and benchmarking your recruiting cost ratio. And once again, turn over the rocks. One of the biggest leakages we've found in finding what your true cost is those recruitment fees from contingency agencies are hiding out there in the operating unit's P&L. Make sure you have a process, a technology, and a management metrics discipline to capture and benchmark those key performance indicators. And what Mark said, and what we've found with a lot of customers, that a pilot program can even trump the data you get from an RFP. RFPs in and of themselves are great, but sometimes the company that does the best job of selling and marketing through an RFP may not be the right fit for your organization. So that's why a lot of customers who start with an RPO initiative, they run a 3, maybe even 6-month pilot program to really not only see if what the vendor says is accurate, but can they perform in your culture and do they align with your company? And once again, the big bang approach, what we've found, especially from a change management perspective, is probably not the right approach for most organizations. That a phased implementation, especially starting with a phase 1 pilot program, you can get some early successes. Those hiring managers and hiring executives can share those successes, and the adoption throughout the organization will be much more collaborative if you look at a phased approach versus a big bang approach. And at the same time, and even though Mark mentioned, right, they were looking for a strategic long-term partner, don't lock yourself into a partnership day one. Maybe you start with that 3 to 6 month pilot and then an annual commitment and see how the vendor performs when times get difficult, how your company adopts the cultural shift of insourcing versus outsourcing, and then you can consider a multi-year agreement, but we wouldn't recommend that upfront as a best practice. And then as a summary, as Larry mentioned, clear objectives that are documented are vital. Experience does count, so getting referrals from that vendor, which seems like vendor selection 101, do talk to their referrals. In fact, ask them the question, who has went away and could I talk to them? You might even learn a lot from that. Define what value means to you. Sometimes for hyper-growth organizations, cost is secondary to, I need to fill these positions quickly because they're directly impacting revenue and product release cycle. Partnership orientation. One of the things that we think is really important is don't view your RPO partner as an outsourced vendor. In fact, view them as just an extension of your internal team. Mark talked a lot about that with their company, how important it was at Panduit. But what we found is putting that they're a vendor label on any strategic outsourcing partner is inherently going to create some bias in your own organization. And also understand that there's no magic bullets. I mean, recruiting fundamentally hasn't changed much in 40 years. And even though there's some real innovative techniques out there to take advantage of social referrals, big data, on-demand recruitment capacity, you're looking to improve every day. And that vendor who's measuring every step and comes to you and says, hey, here's where we see some opportunities for improvement, that's the type of mindset you want to go into this with. And then active governance is a must. Even though you're outsourcing a very strategic function, don't view this as it's now my vendor's problem. You still own, at the end of the day, having great people in your company, that you're attracting great people and that you're retaining great people and that you're promoting great people. So continue to view the RPO as just another internal function that you're going to measure and you're going to manage aggressively. And then the more systemic and metrics driven you can be, the better. So with that, I do want to open it up to questions, so please type those into the questions box. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to give Larry a quick chance to introduce a little bit more about the Human Capital Group.
Well, thank you, Ray. Human Capital Group has been around now for 9 years as an organization, and as I mentioned earlier, we focus on assisting clients who are considering outsourcing HR and payroll functions in making informed business decisions. We've worked with a number of organizations, Global 1000 down to very small mom and pop type organizations, in helping them through the process. More recently, though, and I'd like to point out for your all consideration, last year we conducted in coordination with the Outsourcing Institute their first 10 best RPO provider survey for 2013. And we're in the throes of initiating that survey again this year as we speak right now. And hopefully you all will have an opportunity to participate in that survey. We would welcome your input.
Great, thank you very much, Larry. There is a question, and Mark, this was directed to you. And it's, how much control do you feel you lost by moving to an RPO?
I wouldn't say we lost any control. If anything, we gained a lot of visibility. Our former talent acquisition team was sort of off on their own, and I don't think we had the visibility into their processes and practices that we have today. So I think we actually gained quite a bit from that perspective.
Okay, great, thanks, Mark. And real quick, we have about a minute left. So Accolo, we are recognized as a top recruitment process outsourcing provider in the U.S., and we're very happy to know that the Outsourcing Institute conducted the industry's first truly objective and data-driven research on RPOs, and Accolo was fortunate enough to be voted #1 for both general service capabilities and value for fees worldwide. And the last thing I'd like to share is we really collectively believe it's our responsibility to help organizations really learn more about how they can increase the performance of their hiring function, because at the end of the day, we want to help great people meet great companies. So if you'd like to see any of the tools that we highlighted that could help you with your initial evaluation, please send an email to wecare@accolo.com. And we have things including a recruiting cost ratio calculator that you can use, hiring manager satisfaction surveys that you can go out and conduct that survey whether you're considering outsourcing or not, even a best practice, what are the metrics that we should be recording. We also have employee referral guides, how to conduct a perfect interview guides, and then the Human Capital Group also has graciously offered to provide both their framework and a workbook for you to help evaluate human capital management strategic sourcing. And finally, what I'd like to do as I wrap up is I really want to thank Mark. Thank you for spending your time and sharing with the audience the Panduit experience. I think real-life case studies is the best way to identify whether this might be good for you and how to start the consideration. Larry, thank you very much for Human Capital Group's participation, and even more importantly for the great work that you're doing out there helping corporations understand whether outsourcing will or not work within their organization. And to David and the Mark Outsourcing Institute for putting on the webinar today. Thank you very much, everyone.